What if Kaliningrad was the 51st state? Before we get into the video, shout out to Marshalling Eagle for suggesting this what if. If you want your scenario to be made into a future video, make sure to comment one down below. Now onto the scenario. So while this concept is quite unrealistic, I tried to find a scenario where it could be justified, but still note that most of the events happening in the scenario are unrealistic. So in order to make this timeline work, we need these things to happen. For starters, we need America to invade Prussia, and for that to happen, we need to concentrate on the 1944 Warsaw Uprising in Poland. This uprising was coordinated for years, but ultimately came with little backing from the Allies. So let's say the Polish government in exile puts more pressure for Allied aid and starts refusing to cooperate. Maybe then an invasion could be planned, although it would be a small one as to not take too many forces from D-Day. The American High Command would choose Prussia as the best target, since the Soviets would still surround the German Baltic divisions, leaving the front weakened. Prussia was also considered the main reason for German nationalism, so they would also want to take it to boost morale. They would launch the invasion a bit before the Warsaw Uprising, however they wouldn't be able to go much further than Prussia, although the fact that no one expected an American invasion might result in a decent foothold, but the Warsaw Uprising still gets crushed, and Warsaw destroyed. As goes for the rest of the war, not much would change, and if we are following a realistic timeline, I think the Americans would either fully withdraw and allow the Soviets to occupy the region, or just trade the territory for a more favorable deal in Germany, since the division of Europe was already discussed in the Yalta and Potsdam conferences, and no one would want the issue to wrap into an all-out war. So there really isn't a realistic option here. So let's just say the tension between the Soviets and Americans flares up, resulting in Prussia, or now the American territory of Kingstown, remaining with the US. Now let's get into the Cold War, which in this timeline would be much, much hotter, since Kingstown would be another boiling point of conflict, being in a similar position to West Berlin, but even more tense. And just like in West Berlin, many from nearby countries like Poland and Lithuania would flock to the region, but to prevent this, the Soviets might build another wall, just like in East Berlin. Another change in this timeline would be the demographics of Kingstown. Aside from the new Polish and Lithuanian population, the German population would likely remain in the region, since the US won't expel them, although a sizable portion of Germans might migrate to West Germany, but the region is still likely to retain a German majority. There might also be a small population of Americans, many of whom would be there for military matters. Speaking of which, the US would keep a large military presence in the region, possibly supporting some anti-communist organizations from Kingstown in the Eastern Bloc, the effects of which could come to play later on. One thing that many of you are probably wondering is if the US would position nukes in the region in order to threaten the Soviets. But I think that's unlikely due to the region being surrounded by the Warsaw Pact, and since this would cause even greater tensions than the US control of Kingstown has caused already. But if the US did put nukes in the region, it would result in an even larger Cuban crisis, or maybe even a World War III. The US might also build up the infrastructure of the region in order to show the benefits of their ideology to the citizens of Kingstown and the nearby regions. This is also a change needed for Kingstown to remain with the US after the Cold War. Overall, the Cold War would be changed quite a bit. It's even possible situations such as the Berlin blockade, Berlin crisis, Cuban crisis, and the several crises around Kingstown, like some involving the construction of the Prussian Wall, might result in border incidents. These higher tensions might result in more nuclear arms treaties and a greater fear of nuclear war, although several timelines could end with nuclear Armageddon. Now let's get into the collapse of the Eastern Bloc, since it's likely that Kingstown would have only sped up the process of its collapse, with the Americans possibly supporting such movements like Solidarność, which could result in the Warsaw Pact breaking up earlier, but the fall of the Soviet Union would likely play out around the same time as in our timeline, which also leads to the end of the Prussian Wall. Now, here comes another roadblock in the scenario. Since there is still the risk of Kingstown returning to Germany, since there might still be a German majority. There is also the option of splitting the region between three states due to the new ethnic borders, but in such a scenario the US would likely keep a military base. Or there is even the option of full-out independence. But to get around this, we'll go with a timeline where the US keeps the region due to tensions in Europe, like the Balkans in the 90s and Georgia and Ukraine in the 2000s. And this increased American presence would strengthen NATO in Europe. It's even possible that it threatens Russia not to attack Ukraine, although that's very unlikely. Although Russia's position in the Baltic would be weakened without Kaliningrad, with them lacking its warm water ports, which would slightly weaken the Russian economy. This would also result in Russia getting completely blocked off in the Baltic by NATO. Ukraine could even perform slightly better because of greater American support. As goes for Kingstown itself, the region will likely gain quite a bit of autonomy and function like a nation in a nation, becoming a hub of Polish, Lithuanian, German, and American. Kingstown would likely also sign several treaties with the EU and join the Schengen area, using both the dollar and the euro. Kingstown could also adopt European systems like in healthcare and labor. It's possible these changes could even have an impact on the mainland US. But Kingstown will likely become a US state only after several decades, especially since there will likely be a whole debate over a European territory becoming a state in the United States of America. And when Kingstown will be admitted as a state, it might not be an alternate history, but an alternate future. But eventually, Kingstown will become the 51st or 52nd state, since Puerto Rico would likely be accepted as a state before Kingstown, and it's possible several other territories would be as well. And that concludes What if Kaliningrad was the 51st state? What do you think of this video? Make sure to comment your thoughts down below, and also make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.